Hey, if you're listening to this, thanks for stopping by. My name is Jarrett, and I run the More Than Blockchain podcast. Now, before the podcast rebranded its name to More Than Blockchain, it was entitled Wi-Fi and Water. And so this episode was originally recorded under the podcast's original name. Episodes 1 through 13 were recorded under the name Wi-Fi and Water. And so if you're hearing this, that's why. Please enjoy the episode, and thanks for checking out the More Than Blockchain podcast. Continuing on with the main theme from episode 48, I wanted to dive deeper into why I'm using Bitcoin to hedge my future and share with you why I think everyone should consider Bitcoin to ensure that they're able to retire. That's right, on this episode, we're going to talk about retirement. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is Wi-Fi and Water. Before we go any further, I'd like to say that I'm not a financial advisor, and everything I share with you today is from my own investment experience and retirement strategy, which is really based on the idea that as a millennial, I can't follow the playlist baby boomers use to find retirement because, well, the world has and continues to evolve. In order to understand the potential future, let's take a look back at the past. In more recent world history, we have seen three big periods of economic revolution, where technology has advanced civilization and led to big economic global booms. From 1750 to 1830, it was railroads and steam engines. From 1870 to the 1900s, it was internal combustion engines, electricity, and petroleum. And from 1969 to the present, computer, the web, and mobile phones. And there's reason to believe that moving forward, unlike in the past, technological advances may not see the infinite returns as our more finite reserves like fossil fuels, timber, precious metals located near the Earth's surface, and water start to deplete. All of which leads to why I'm using Bitcoin to hedge the more traditional retirement vehicles, like a 401k, Roth IRA, or even pension plan, which are all rooted in the prosperity and depend on the traditional stock market's return to thrive. I also should mention that I'm intentionally not going to discuss Social Security as it relates to retirement, but I will in a future episode. I'm excited to share some macro ideas as to why the traditional stock market may not be able to provide the historical returns of the last century, which have fluctuated somewhere between 7 to 12% annually. And in order to do so, let me introduce you to some ideas from Robert J. Gordon. Robert J. Gordon is an economist at Northwestern University, and he published a paper in the National Bureau of Economic Research, in which he outlined 6 potential headwinds that could push back on the idea that we're going to continue to see the same expansive economic return that we've seen over the last 100, 200 years, and how that will impact our future. So let's talk about these 6 headwinds or potential macro obstacles to continued long-term growth of the more traditional stock market. That really is the bedrock of how we fund our 401ks, Roth IRAs, and pension plans. Number 1 is that we're simply not going to be able to double our workforce again, like we've done in the past. From 1960 to 1990, women came into the workplace. And over those 30 years, we basically doubled our ability to produce. When you double production, you can sometimes triple, quadruple, or even quintuple the output. And since women are now in the workplace, we're not really going to be able to ever do that again on a national or even global level. Number 2 is a loss in the value of education. Education has become both too expensive and increasingly irrelevant to the needs of the modern workforce, particularly in the United States. Unlike in the 60s or even into the 90s, a single individual graduating with an undergrad degree simply doesn't mean the same to the individual on a micro level or the economy as a whole on the macro level. In other words, getting a higher education degree is no longer directly correlated to attaining a well-paying job like it once was for the individual, nor does it mean that the larger macroeconomy is better off. Yet, many jobs still prefer candidates with an advanced degree. This conundrum is leaving us educated but not necessarily more fit to be financially positive for the society as a whole. Not to mention student debt and the burden that brings to new graduates. But don't worry, we'll discuss that later in another headwind. Number 3 is rising inequality. Basically, wages have been stagnant almost my entire life, while the cost of goods and services have increased. And as this continues, less and less people are going to have the ability to invest in the stock market, which will not allow it to grow at the same rate as it has in the past. This is the reason why Henry Ford increased his employees' pay almost a century ago. He did so because he wanted to make sure that his employees could afford the products they were creating. Flash forward to today, and wages remain stagnant, and rising prices of goods, homes, and even used cars are not allowing or keeping people from investing in and helping to grow the stock market. Individual inequality can have a huge impact on the health of the macroeconomy when millions upon millions of people struggle to make ends meet. Number 4, globalization. Globalization, and more specifically, the outsourcing of work due to the more connected global economy, has seen immense growth in the last 30 to 50 years that we just may not see again. We'll eventually hit a point where we can't outsource to increase profits. Number 5, energy and the environment. Over the past 50 to 70 years, or even longer time period, we've been able to use fossil fuels to drastically change the world we live in and increase living standards for larger and larger swaths of people than ever before. However, this fossil fuel-driven growth has its cost and will eventually be deflated by one of the two following things: either environmental regulation or a total ecosystem collapse, both of which will be paid by younger and future generations, as the climate crisis will likely force us into less profit-heavy means of creating energy, for the good of the planet, and also, all profit aside, a likely less stable climate with ever-increasing costs being lost to climate crisis disasters. It's estimated that the US government already spends around $100 billion annually to rebuild after climate crisis-related disasters. And unfortunately, this number may rise as the profit-heavy global system of fossil fuels winds down. Number 6, debt. Household debt, government debt, corporate debt, student debt, and credit card debt has all been growing steadily and eventually will need to be paid back, which can only really be done via an increase in income or a decrease in spending. For governments, they can tax more to create income or they can print money, neither of which are good long-term solutions without a good long-term plan, which in the United States is hard to do with the ever-shifting political winds. Democrats see taxes and spending one way, Republicans see both of these in a completely different way. For households and businesses, the only option may be spending less. Essentially, if we're using our economic energy both as individuals or at the government level to pay down debt, we're not investing in growth or the future. Now, Gordon did have a remedy to ensure that the average individual person who relies on a stock market-backed financial vehicle would have enough to retire, but it's not a very positive outlook. Can you guess what it is? That's right. Move the age of retirement back. This idea of retiring between 60 and 65 was created years ago, when people were only living till 70 to 75. But now with people living into their 80s and 90s a lot more often, people may need to work later in life to make up for the fact that their more traditional financial retirement vehicles, like a 401k, a Roth IRA, or a pension plan, simply may not cover all the years left they have in life if, say, they decide to retire at 65. I mean, we're living longer than ever before, so we should work more, right? Needless to say, all of these 6 reasons are why I'm using Bitcoin to hedge the more traditional, previously mentioned retirement vehicles. Bitcoin over the last decade has outgrown the S&P 500 by nearly 200% annually, and the traditional stock market's growth may not mimic the last century or even the last 50 years as we move into the future. It's just not certain that we'll have infinite growth in a world of finite resources. However, as globalization and a more connected world economy comes into focus, Bitcoin's role as a global store of value, which many see as a natural digital replacement to gold, could grow to one day be worth $1 million a coin. I know that this sounds wild because it's currently trading around 41,000, but Bitcoin, while known the world over, is still young in its adoption, with less than 1.2% of the global population actually invested. Not to mention, it's barely a teenager, as it was born in 2009. But that's why I'm using it to hedge the annual growth of my 401k to ensure that I can retire at the age I want. I, like many in the cryptocurrency and financial services community, see an unlimited upside over the next decade and beyond for Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't going anywhere, and as they say in investing, follow the money. And well, banks, hedge funds, corporations, and millionaires and billionaires are buying it up. Because, well, when you're wealthy or run a bank and or company, you've always got to hedge the future. I hope that this has got you thinking about retirement. And if you'd like to learn more and have a Netflix account, check out their documentary series, Explained. And more specifically, try and see if you can watch the episode on retirement. It builds on the idea that in the US and around the world, we're not prepared as a society to all stop working at a certain age unless we plan for it. On a final thought, I'd like to quote a good friend and soccer coach, John Scheimer. If you're failing to plan, then you're planning to fail. And I'm planning to retire using Bitcoin. What's your plan? Thanks again for listening to this episode. And if you're interested to learn more about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, go to our Instagram at Wi-Fi and Water Podcast and click the link in bio. You'll see a link there to a YouTube playlist that talks more expansively about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. You'll also see 2 links below to Coinbase and Binance, where you can set up your own account if you're interested in buying some cryptocurrency or investing in Bitcoin. Know that these links are affiliate links, which simply means if you decide to use them to sign up, I'm going to get a little kickback. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Wi-Fi and Water Podcast, and subscribe wherever you are listening to the podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see everyone next time. Hey, it's Jarrett again. The episode you just listened to was originally recorded under the podcast's first name, Wi-Fi and Water. So please disregard those follow shoutouts and be sure to follow us on social media under our newly rebranded name, More Than Blockchain. And be sure to subscribe to the pod wherever you're listening to it. Thanks for checking out this episode, and I'll see you next time.